know you stressing, you don't gotta keep me guessing. I'm full of questions in return to get the silent treatment. I don't know why I'm speaking. You say it's way too late. Goodbye, you leaving. Why you got me stressing? I could have a whole collection, just be faded in my own dimension. You so complicated. Swear that pussy Grammy nominated. Just make some music. Fuck all those bullshit. Will you stay? Just a little while back. Just a little while back. Will you stay? Just a little while back. Just a little while, babe. Just a little while. Just a little. Girl, now, baby, don't you leave my side. Don't even try. I'ma go crazy, girl. You save me, meditate me, give me peace of mind. It's only she and I. Ocean floor, how deep we die. We be high, looking for another fucking tree to climb. She was playing hard to get a read between the lines. Binge watch Sopranos, made it all the way to season 5. I am her, she is I. She had to come to see a freaky side, leaving me behind. Will you stay? Just a little while, babe. Just a little while, babe. Will you stay? Just a little while, babe. Just a little while. Just a little while, just a little while, babe. Just a little while, just a little while. Where you walk up in the room, all I think about is what I wanna do to you. I don't wanna be polite no more. Make yourself a home, where the fuck you gon' go? The way you walk up in the room, all I think about is what I wanna do to you. I don't wanna be polite no more. Make yourself a home, where the fuck you gon' go? You stay. Just a little while, babe. Just a little while. Just a little while. Just a little while. Will you stay? Just a little while, babe. Just a little while. Just a little while. Will you stay? Just a little while, babe. Just a little while. Just a little while. Just a little while. Will you stay? Just a little while. They say I'm too young to love you. I don't know what I need. They think I don't understand the freedom land of the 70s. I think I'm too cool to know ya. You say I'm like the ice I freeze. I'm churning out novels like beat poetry on amphetamines. I said well, my boyfriend's my jazz collection's rare. I can play almost anything. I'm a Brooklyn baby. I'm a Brooklyn baby. They say I'm too young to love you. They say I'm too dumb to see. They judge me like a picture in a picture book. Other colors they forgot to read. I think we're like fire and water. I think we're like the wind and sea. You're burning up, I'm cooling down. You're up, I'm down. You're blonde, I see. But I'm free. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And I'm free. Because my boyfriend's in a band. He plays guitar while I sing Lou Reed. I've got feathers in my hair. I get down to beat poetry. My jazz collection's rare. I can play almost anything. I'm a Brooklyn baby. I'm a Brooklyn baby. I'm talking about my generation. I'm talking about that new nation. And if you don't like it, you can beat it, baby. Never like the way I say it. If you don't get it, then forget it. 'Cause I don't have to fucking explain it. Because my boyfriend's in a band. He plays guitar while I sing Lou Reed. I've got feathers in my hair. I get high on hydroponic weed. And my jazz collection's rare. I get down to beat poetry. I'm a Brooklyn baby. I'm a Brooklyn baby. Blue jeans, white shirt, walked into the room, you know you made my eyes burn. I was like James Dean, for sure. You're so fresh to death and sick as cancer. You were sort of punk rock, I grew up on hip hop. You fit me better than my favorite sweater, and I know time. Big dreams, gangster. Said you had to leave to start your life over. I was like, no, please, stay here. We don't need no money, we can make it all work. But we headed out on Sunday, said he'd come on Monday. I stayed waiting, anticipating and pacing, but he was chasing paper. Caught up in the game, it was the last I heard. I will love you till the end of time. I would wait a million years. Promise you'll remember that you're mine. Baby, can you see through the tears? Love you more than those bitches before. Say you'll remember, say you'll remember, baby. I will love you till the end of time. That's alright. Told you that no matter what you did, I'd be by your side. Cause I'm a ride or die. Whether you fail or fly, well shit, at least you tried. But when you walked out the door, a piece of me died. Told you I wanted more, it's not what I had in mind. Just wanted like before. We were dancing all night, then they took you away. Stole you out of my life. You just need to remember. Till the end of time. Come on, everybody, come along with me. The truth was built to bend, a mechanism to suspend. The guilt is what you will require, and still you've got to dance, little liar. Just like those fears to pop in fears, and you'll be forced to take that awful quiz, yeah. And you're bound to trip. She'll detect the fiction on your lips and dig a contradiction up, and the clean comment will hurt, and you can never get it spotless. When there's dirt beneath the dirt, the light takes a lot less time. It's not an alibi you need just yet. Oh no, it's something for those beads of sweat. Yes, that will get you back to normal. And after you have dabbed the patch, you'll breathe and then proceed to scratch the varnish off that newly added calmness, so as not to raise any alarms too it spoilers. When there's dirt beneath the dirt. Oh, yeah. The liar takes a lot less time to decide on the saunter. Have you got itchy bones and all your time alone? Can you rack your mind being riddled with the wrong memories? Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am NS, or Nerd Slayer, your host. And I'll be honest, I don't know the tempo of that last song that well. So that was pretty freestyle. For those who are familiar with the song, you're probably like, what the heck? But anyway. So I wanted to do a stream today because I've actually, the whole past week I was sick. This is the first week that I started feeling better. And I did my voiceover for Friday the 13th, the game, a couple of days ago. So that video will be coming out pretty soon. I'm currently working on the next Pokemon video, which is going to be about Pokemon TCG. The Pokemon, well, it's called Pokemon TCG Online. But it's the one that was done by Direwolf Digital and got recently replaced, I think about 9 or 10 months ago. So we're going to talk about, or I'm going to be covering that next as well. So, yeah. And then in other news, I got into gold yesterday in League. So that was cool. It's been a minute. Brightness. Maybe I should just leave this open because it helps with my brightness. And I saw some MMO news that I wanted to react to. For example, Daybreak ended up selling PlanetSide for like 5.9 million, which is not like super surprising in its own right. But it ended up being traded to a company called Bay Tree Tower Limited. And according to the article, they don't know who this is. And there is a private equity company called Baytree, so maybe it's that, but it could just be some fans with a lot of money, who knows. But that's gonna be pretty interesting news, I think, seeing this unfold, seeing what comes of this. You haven't heard about the Pokemon TCG game? Yeah, I think that they did pretty poor advertising. I'll just show it on screen. Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm covering it soon. But it didn't get a lot of coverage because I didn't even know about it. But it's basically like, for MTG fans that exist out there, it's kind of like MTGO. You know what I'm saying? Like, so MTGO is like the old version of MTG Online, and MTG Arena is like the new Hearthstone version. And a lot of people prefer the old version because you could trade cards, you could buy cards, so on and so forth. The same thing kind of applies here with Pokemon TCG. It's a TCG, so you could actually trade cards. In current Pokemon, aka Pokemon Live, you can't trade cards. So, yeah. It's kind of a downer. And also, how come my chat thingy? Oh no, I see it here. Doesn't look like it's popping up. Maybe it goes away whenever I click on something else. But yeah, so that was that's gonna be interesting for me to cover, and I'm excited about that. What else? So today I kind of just wanted to leave it pretty general. I did think I missed talking about some DDO things last time, and so I did want to cover some of those. And one of those things is actually, so in DDO, Dragon's Dogma Online, I talked about some of my ideas there. And some of the ideas that aren't covered very much in the whole online scene. And that's kind of the fact that, like, MMORPGs have kind of become such a popular term and catch-all term that they've kind of like taken over the world. And I'm not even exaggerating. They've actually taken over the world. And so many different regions, their games will also get classified as the same thing, even if those people from that region don't call their game that. So what was really convenient for me is that I got to make that argument and make that case with Dragon's Dogma Online by just simply telling the story, right? Because the story literally says, and the creators basically, you know, say this in quote form, they wanted to learn from Western MMO elements, but they wanted to do it in an MO fashion, so multiplayer online fashion. So not fully fledged MMO, but they wanted to take elements from MMOs. And so being able to see the creators actually talk about that, get their quotes, and present it in my video, I didn't get any pushback. And I thought that that was really interesting because oftentimes people will push back against me when it's about Final Fantasy XIV. But when I was talking about Dragon's Dogma Online, and it has a hub zone, so it's not that different than some of these other games that get called MMOs like PSO2. But I didn't get any pushback this time. And I think it was because it was presented from the lens of this is the market, this is how they were classifying it. And the game itself, Dragon's Dogma, for those that don't know, is literally a Western game. It's a Japanese game, but it's styled after Western games. And so that's what kind of makes it unique, is it's this interesting blend. Yeah, so that's what I heard as well, actually, Sam. Weirdly enough, we must have been watching the same content because the same thing I've heard about the TCG Online is that it has a lot of coin flips, and it's just it feels like it's like very feature weak compared to, as you said, the Yu-Gi-Oh game, but even other games these days like Hearthstone, MTGA has tons of options to play it. I think that that's like as card games are becoming more digital. I like that. I'm a digital guy, obviously. But the downsides are that sometimes you can lose the sheer variety that can take place in more local games. And I think that the online component can make that much easier because they have way bigger access to bigger player pools. But if you just don't offer the content, then you're not, you know, then you're basically kind of offering a subpar experience, I think, personally, compared to actual card games. So that's the problem, is like some of these CCGs and TCGs online are subpar card experiences for those that have played the card game. So when you watch like the World Championship and Pokemon, it's being played with hard cards. That doesn't mean that the TCG online game, or it's called live now, sucks. But it does mean something. You know what I'm saying? So there's something you can draw from that. But yeah, that's honestly pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the DDO video. It did really well, and yeah, I was really surprised that I got to talk about some higher level ideas that I don't always get to talk about. Because here's the thing, like, can I talk about any kind of idea? Technically, yes. For example, in my NC Soft video recently, I got to talk about some of the like more specific stuff when it comes to preservation. Now, that video only got 20,000 views. And so when I make purely educational videos or purely like update videos like that one is, I have to make them with sponsors or I'm not gonna make them much money. And that's not even like, even if the videos do well, they just don't do as well as the Death of a Game videos. And so it's just like, if I'm trying to make money, I should just be making Death of a Game videos. But since I also feel like it's my, you know, job as well to educate, and I don't want to be like, so one thing, like, I'll explain my kind of perspective on education, specifically with online games, because maybe people are interested in this. So for me personally, ever since I was young, I always liked making guide videos and teaching people how to play MMOs. So I think there's an educational part that's just built into me when it comes to these kinds of games. And for people who've played MMOs with me, or even just, you know, MMORPGs, I feel like they can back me up and say that, like, that's just my playstyle. I'm like a helpful player. And it's because I like to play that way. I like to help people improve. I liked, you know, growing up, I was kind of always the player who brought his friends to play MMOs that never played them before. So it was kind of like my job as a kid to be the onboarder for my friends. And so that kind of became my role after a while. And I think when I started playing with older people and they would struggle with some of the things that I didn't struggle with, like mechanics, I felt like it was almost like my place to teach them because they would always help me. So like, in a sense, like, because my online RPG career was very like reciprocal, I also felt like learning was always a part of it. But to bring it more now macro perspective, like, why am I so interested in education, including sometimes making videos that don't make that much money? And it's because of this. It's a couple of things. One thing is that I don't think there's that many people that are that qualified to talk about it. I think you can probably count them on one hand. And that's not me trying to be edgy. That's just me being honest. So I think that that's a big part of the reason why. Another reason why is that I feel like when it comes to my view of online RPGs, I'm not nearly as biased as most of the other creators. And people might take that the wrong way and think, yeah, but you've made your bias known before in certain instances. But that's the difference, is like, I'm honest when I'm biased about something. I don't just shit on it and then not tell you my opinion. So I'm honest about, like, hey, I like these kinds of games. I like this kind of approach. But maybe this could have been done better. And I think that that's something that's kind of important about me doing educational content, is that we can talk about things from a perspective where it's not like PvE is bad or PvP is bad and let's not learn anything. Or systems don't work, so let's just throw them out. You know, it's like, that's not really helpful. Now, would it make for more engaging content? Potentially. But it's not educational. It doesn't teach you anything. And so that's kind of like another reason why. Another reason why is that I'm interested in educating in this kind of like field, if you will, is that I feel like it's a burgeoning field. It's so young, and I mean, virtual worlds have only technically been around for like 40 years, which is the lifetime of some people that are still creating today, including the founding fathers, basically, of the industry, are still alive, guys. Like Jake Song, Raph Koster, Richard Bartle, they're still alive. Like, it's kind of crazy to think about that. Richard Garriott, they're alive. And mind you, we've lost some of our creators and some of our OGs, like Brendan Green of Meridian 59. We also lost Brad McQuaid of EverQuest. But we're a young industry, and part of that's what makes me so excited about it is that, like, as I've been following it and engaged with it now for 20 years, which is about half of its lifespan, I've seen so much change and growth, and it's just it's insane, honestly. Like, I'm always going to be biased about online RPGs because of my story is so much wrapped in them. But even if I'm going to be just slightly objective for a second, they're more ambitious than every other kind of game. They're harder to make, and they're also more engaging. And so I think that, like, on a personal level, those are all the same things that still make me fall in love with it. And part of education is explaining the concepts to other people so they can understand the love more. So it's not just being a technical nerd and being like, well, actually, it's blah, 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 blah. That's helpful, but you also need, like, okay, well, I'm explaining the concept because I'm trying to tell you why it matters. Or why games are built specific ways. And why they sometimes have certain benefits and strengths and sometimes have certain weaknesses. That's kind of the things that I'm, at the moment, the most interested in educating people on. There are some higher level ideas that I would love to talk about. I think that those are going to take a lot of time because we're still very much, like, in the early phases of educating in this field. And then also, the other thing is as it continues to evolve, if I don't keep my hand on the pulse, I can lose sight of what's going on. And I think we've seen this with developers, where they're, like, legendary for making an old MMO, and then they come out with a new one and it feels like it's totally out of touch. I think they probably were out of touch, if that's how it feels. And I think that comes from making sure you're continuing to play and study the games that are currently in circulation. And that's something that I, like, am pretty passionate about as well, is, like, I feel like that part keeps me relevant, is I'm never gonna be the guy who's like, get off my lawn. Because maybe I might complain about things. In a way, you're like, wow, he's such an old head. But I'm always willing to give the games a shot. And I feel like that's the key, is, like, I'm still playing the newer games as they come out, even if they suck. And that matters a lot to me personally, because I need to feel like I'm relevant in the current, like, techno space. But I also feel like it helps build the trust that you guys can have in me, that, like, hey, if I see something great, like, I'll be talking about it. If something seems like it's on the cusp of greatness, I'll talk about it. And if something could have been great but made mistakes, then maybe it gets featured on the series. Richard Garriott blocked me on Twitter because I asked if he took his meds. He definitely did not. So Richard Garriott, unfortunately, has, I think, lost a lot of people's kind of, like, respect as a developer, because he's had a couple of flop games. And there's nothing wrong with having flop games, but he's kind of, like, had this pattern of never really taking accountability for it and always kind of having these reasons why. And you might think that that works, and it does as a CEO, but when you're also a creative, which is what Richard, Garriott says he is, people start to not trust your creativeness anymore because they feel like it's so wrapped up in the business part. And I feel like that's the problem with Richard, is, like, I think he is creative, but his creativeness is so stuck to his business mind that it's like, I don't think you're going to get those separated anymore, as you've seen with his games, unfortunately. But yeah, my thing is about like old MMO developers that seem like they're out of touch or whatever. I'm never insulting about them. It's never about like, oh wow, they seem like they're so, because they are very talented. They're very capable developers. The problem is if you're not like learning lessons as you're doing your work, and you're not like designing proper systems that fit in a proper world, it doesn't matter how much experience you have or how many games you've shipped. And that's why it's so easy for me as a longtime tester who has not created his own MMO, right? Like, I've never shipped my own MMO or online RPG game. But yet it's still easy for me to alpha test a game and be like, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and these systems aren't going to work. It's because I've been playing and testing the games for such a long time, and I'm looking at it from a world-building perspective. And that's why it's like, I don't feel scared to give this information for free, because like sometimes people have asked me, what do you do when you do consulting work? Obviously, it's going to be specific to whatever project they're doing. So like, I can't sit here and talk about it. The times that I've done consulting work, because I'm pretty much always under an NDA, but I am basically talking with a client about their game or their idea, and maybe I review their documents, maybe I give them some advice, maybe I give them my market perspective. In a couple of cases, I've tested their games, and also tested out some of their systems and ideas. And yeah, very oftentimes, even in the idea phase, I can look at stuff and be like, that's not going to work. And it's because I've seen enough systems and I've been studying them for such a long time that it is easier for me to just look at it before things get too far and be like, okay, maybe you should change this. The problem is that oftentimes games are presented to the public, even if they are alpha testing or closed beta testing or whatever else. If it's a big project, you don't have a lot of like control over how much is going to actually change. And then even if things do change, there's no like guarantee it's going to go the positive direction. The best example I can give is New World. I really truly believe that if New World would have been given to me when I first tested it, and they would have just listened, they would have made a pretty good game. The problem is that they got cold feet, changed their idea last second, and thought that that was ever gonna fly. And their population right now is like dropping, and it's funny because I see the way people describe it. They're like, oh, it's because like they're in a content lull. I'm like, guys, they had an X-Pack drop like 3-4 months ago. What the fuck are you talking about content lull? Like, you understand that X-Packs back in the day, when they were called expansions, if they dropped a couple of months ago, you were still playing the expansion. Right? But they spent 2 years making this expansion, basically, and people got done with it after 1 month. Now, am I Nostradamus? Maybe there's some predictive elements. I used to be an estimator, a cost estimator. I worked, on very big projects over millions of dollars. There's a certain predictive element, maybe. I did work in that field professionally. But it's not really that. Like, and I wish I could sit here and say it's all this like, I'm just going like this. But in reality, what I'm doing is, okay, here's a world. You design it and sell it initially as a sandbox world. I tested that world. When we gave you feedback on that world, your response was to get rid of it. They completely changed the game, the core game. Instead of it being a build game now, they made it just a game that you go and kind of do random or regular MMO leveling stuff in. That took all the agency of the settlements. It took all the player customization and guild systems. They removed the criminal system completely removed a whole element of the game that it was built on, right? And then after that, so you might be saying, yeah, but they committed, like, stop being so biased. It's like, here's the thing. I actually wasn't even when it happened. I said, look, I know what they're doing. They're trying to band-aid fix it, turn it into a theme park at the last second, and then hope that they can, like, churn out content fast enough that people kind of won't see the difference, really. But here's the problem. Theme parks are the most common game, especially right now. People are very highly expecting them to be performers, whether that be through story, content, immersion, right? We're talking about WoW, we're talking about Final Fantasy, we're talking about Secret World, we're talking about SWTOR. These games offer pretty good single-player experiences. Now, New World doesn't. So boom, it already gets beat up bad right there, right? So they get beat up badly by their competition. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, but now the criminal system and all the PvP, like, the other players can play, but the game was built on danger. It was called New World for a reason. They were going to a new world and it was supposed to be dangerous. You removed that entire element. Now, what does that mean? It means you have to take the Rift approach. And now you have to make the world super dangerous. Because if you don't, you've just neutered the whole concept of what the world is supposed to be. And that's what they did. They neutered the concept of the world. And so then you're playing this catch-up game where you're launching basically unfinished, right? Like, they had no raids, no serious dungeons, no real in-game content to speak of. That's a failure. That's a failed launch. Now, most people will argue, yeah, but MMOs always launch unfinished. Yes, but what MMO do you know that was the theme park MMO? And I'll tell you why I'm doing this in a second. That launched with no raids or dungeons. It doesn't happen, guys. Even the original game that created the idea of it, EverQuest, launched with raids. Like, do you understand the absurdity of that? Like, and then, like, you might be saying, yeah, but this is for the newer fan base. They're none the wiser. They might not be wiser. What's up with my camera here? They might not be none the wiser or whatever. The problem is they're still power gamers, guys. They're gonna run out of things to do, and that's what the New World fan base did. They ran out of things to do. And I hate that I can sit here and just, like, map this out, and I was so far ahead of mapping it out ahead of time. It's frustrating, because it's just like, man, imagine if, like, one of those guys would have just listened, you know? We could have avoided so much of this. Are you saying that New World should be how Elden Ring structures their world? No. Not at all. Talented people can get rusty. Two talented devs from 20 years ago can compete in this market if they don't stop. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, New World's just an easy example, to be honest. And all this time would imply that it's been a lot of time, but like I just said, the expansion only came out a couple of months ago. And the population has continued to drop. So for example, the average player base is actually lower than it's almost ever been. It's at 12,000 players right now. It was around that before they had the content come last year. So they've already returned back to kind of where they were, going to return to. And for people wondering, why do player bases matter so much? The reason why they matter so much is that when content gets created by a content team, unless they're just made of money and just somehow idiotic, they're never gonna make content ahead of time if they don't think they have the ability to continue to make that money. What does that mean? It's why a big reason why I created my series. So growing up, I would always play games that were, considered alive by most people's standard. And I would play those games and I'd be like, yeah, but there's no content forecast, meaning that, like, we're not going to have anything to do for a long time. And because we don't have an active player base, we can't actually summon enough cheddar, basically, to put it simply, to move the needle enough to get more content. So this was a big reason why I created my series, was because as a kid, I would play these games and I felt like they were kind of dead and they didn't have much content. So I figured that out at a very young age, which is something that Josh Strife Hayes actually talked about in a video of his as well, that Raph Koster backed up both of us on and said that we're right on the money, which is that theme park styles of generating content, where think of it as canned goods, right? Versus perishable versus non-perishable, right? So canned goods versus a perishable good. The difference between theme park content is that it's perishable. So meaning that the content expires and it has a shelf life, right? This is very normal for WoW, for Final Fantasy XIV, for ESO, for all of the games that are pretty much popular right now that constantly put out new expansions. They have to put out new expansions and constantly raise the bar because that's what their player base expects, because that's the kind of game that you're playing and that people expect. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? Because when it works really well. Look at Guild Wars 2 even had a similar concept early on. The problem is as soon as Guild Wars 2's living seasons stopped working, they had to basically scrap the entire concept. And it's because it doesn't fit the kind of world they were making. So they were basically making two different games at the same time. So in the case of a game like Final Fantasy XIV and WoW and ESO, these are the biggest developers and publishers in the space with the biggest IPs. So people have this weird kind of warped reality where they think, oh no, that's everyone can do that. Like everyone could do, dude, everyone could just do Final Fantasy XIV. Everyone could just do WoW. Everyone could just copy ESO. It's like, they can't. Every IP you just mentioned is very popular, which means that if these weren't popular IPs, we don't have to guess what happens when they're not. Just look at the failed IPs that have tried to do it. And it's not all like simple as, well, they failed just because they weren't popular. But it's a big reason why they can never come back, right? When you look at the games that I all mentioned, they all had comebacks, right? Final Fantasy XIV, ESO, Tamriel Unlimited. You see what I'm saying? Because they could take those big punches, get beat up, and still keep churning. See what I'm saying? So these are the biggest IPs led by the biggest companies putting out the most content. So it creates this like slightly weird perspective. The blockbuster effect is what I like to call it, where people think that that's the norm. And so that's why so many developers are terrified of doing theme park style content. They're scared because they know they can't keep up with these companies. They just can't, guys. Like, it's not even feasible for them to really even try. Like, they don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to operate with, or even just 100 million. So that's why, like, the indie revolution is not making a lot of theme park story games. It's because they're hard, and the bar at the moment, which is good, don't get me wrong, like, remember, there was a time when we had almost no story in online RPGs, all of them, not just massive ones. We had almost no story, we had almost no single player experiences, no ability to choose your own options, no ability to even like customize your story experience. That was lacking. Well, then we had a big influx of that, and it's changed the market in a lot of different ways, in a good way, but obviously every change comes with it. Sometimes there's going to be negatives. And part of that negative comes from, well, the sandbox experience is more non-perishable, and that's because it's giving you an experience that is repeatable. So for example, in Star Wars Galaxies, why are people still playing the emulated version? A lot of them. They put out new content sometimes, right? Like, it's not like they're not putting out new content. That's a disingenuous argument. But the reason is that there's enough systems in that game that create content for players, and there's enough already there, of course, that players don't feel like they necessarily need that much more content, right? So that shows, in my opinion, the strength of having good systems versus just having the kind of slow or rather the fast burning content. Now, I made my channel largely because of my stance on galaxies being different than most people. So what I'm about to say is going to contradict what I just said in a sense. When NGE came out, a big part of the fan base was resistant to it, and for good reason. Now, there were some parts about it that I actually would argue in favor of, and still to this day argue in favor of. One of the biggest things is they added a single player kind of leveling experience. It was called the Legacy Questline. The Legacy Questline is basically one giant like tutorial. Now, to talk about the absurdity back, mind you, this is way back then. This is like 2006, okay? So the player base is fairly uneducated at the time. And we thought that like sandbox style games was like the ultimate way to do things. And that's why I keep doing these a lot when I say sandbox and theme park. It's because I'm trying to kill those as concepts in people's minds, actually. Because they're not very good concepts that people, like they were useful for when they were useful, but I think that they're losing usefulness, and I'll explain why. But anyway, so at the time, in 2006 or 2007, people were like, okay, NGE sucks. Because now there's a leveling experience that teaches you how to play the game. I'm not being facetious or ironic. People actually had trouble with the fact that they were teaching you how to play the game, and it was because this was people's arguments. Back in my day, shared trauma, by the way, Stockholm Syndrome shit, they're like, back in my day, we just got dropped in Mos Eisley and we had no fucking clue what to do. And that was a great experience. And it's like, okay. But did you know that RAF has come out on record and said that like they launched like unfinished and they didn't have enough content? So meaning that like your idea of back in my day is just they made a unfinished game and had to launch it in a bind. It was not a fucking like feature of the game. So people had that weird idea back then where it was like, no, you're supposed to get spawned in the middle of nowhere and have no idea of what to do. It's like, who wrote that rule? Like, what? Who said that you can't have a tutorial? What the fuck? Like, nobody ever made that a rule. It was just like some weird thing that people like adopted as sandbox players. We don't need tutorials. It's like, what? Yes, you do. Like, trust me, I played those games. You still need tutorials. So then why do I hate the concept of theme park and sandbox? Well, that's why. It's because originally the concepts were never supposed to be separated from each other. This is coming from Raf Koster, again, the guy that basically invented the MUDs that became MMOs and also invented Ultima Online and Galaxies. Said that theme park was never supposed to be isolated and sandbox was never supposed to be isolated. Think about it for a second. When you isolate them, you actually create a lot of problems. For example, when you isolate theme park from sandbox, now there's almost no repeatable content. That's a problem Final Fantasy XIV suffers from a lot. And the fan base is so used to it that even the creator himself has basically told them, hey, just, you know, stop playing for a bit. You know, it's no problem. It's like, they've gotten away with that as a problem, basically. But think about it, with the PvP scene on the rise right now in Final Fantasy XIV, you might wonder why. Well, there was always a bit of a counterculture there, to be honest. I was there since the beginning. But the other reason is because this is a bit of a counterculture to what we're talking about. It's the sandbox elements, which are more PvP oftentimes, coming in and kind of becoming more of a content stay. What that shows is, had they made the game with that more in mind in the beginning, they would have had more success, right? It's very logical to make that as a process through elimination. So theme park showing off the world to teach you about sandbox mechanics wouldn't be a bad idea. Yeah, and that's the thing is that like, because they became these separate identities, a lot of developers started separating them completely. But here's the ironic part. The games that oftentimes have the most respect from the player bases and love still today in modern times are the games that combined them together. Guess what's the best example of this? It's hiding right in everyone's face. Nobody ever considers this game a theme park because they always feel like it's such a sandbox game. But most of its content is fucking instanced, and also is not even playable by groups. It's a solo-based game that has a lot of theme park content. There we go. Everyone figured it out. Minecraft's a good example too, by the way. I will accept Minecraft as well, but it's RuneScape. RuneScape has like had this genius like approach where it's like very hardcore and has all these different ways to play the game, but simultaneously it's incredibly theme park. Think about that. It has like 25 million fucking instances that you can just switch from, by the way. On top of that, it has tons of like single player content stuff that you can just do by yourself, where you don't even need to interact with other players. So I think that like that's the magic of old school RuneScape, and RuneScape in general has been that it's maintained its identity as a single player theme park style game, but it has all of these sandbox elements to it. So yeah, everyone describes RuneScape as a sandbox, and I think that that's fair. But they almost never talk about the fact that it's filled with theme park content. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'll give you an opposite example. SWTOR is a theme park game with almost no sandbox content, and you feel the difference. Compare the two games together. They feel worlds different. Because SWTOR needs theme park content to even function. RuneScape, you can actually ignore a lot of that stuff and go do your Iron Man if you wanted to. It's a bit of a strange game, but I think that's what makes it so interesting to me. Also, there's other games too, very famous games like Ultima Online. Over time, started adding more theme park content to it, right? Another example would be, I think Darkfall could have used theme park content, for example, to onboard people, to teach them how to play, like so on and so forth. So there are many examples where you're pretty much always going to see me argue that way these days. And I think that some people take that, and this is something that I actually acknowledged in one of my videos, they take it as combative because the norm right now is very theme park focused. And I think that that's fair. It seems like I'm always arguing against your favorite games, but the problem is that I like your favorite games. That kind of throws a whole wrench into like, you're biased or you just hate these games. It's like, well, I like SWTOR. I like Final Fantasy XIV. I like these games, Guild Wars 2. I like modern WoW, right? Are they my favorite games? Do I love them? No, I think that they have some weaknesses to them and parts that I don't like about what they are. But do I think that they could do it better? Yes, I think they could do it much better. And I think that when you look at games like Final Fantasy XIV, it's actually a great example of that. Adding more sandbox content to the game, not really gonna hurt people's feelings. If it didn't have theme park content and you tried to make it a sandbox game, they already tried that. It was called the first game. Like, the first Final Fantasy XIV was like the sandbox Final Fantasy game, but they forgot to actually add content. And so they literally flipped that shit on its head whenever they did A Realm Reborn. And look at the results. So people then might think logically, yeah, so then that means that sandbox doesn't work. And it's like, no. It means you still need to fill the sandbox. You can't just leave it as an empty sandbox anymore. It doesn't work anymore. Unless your systems are Minecraft level. Somebody earlier asked, how come survival games can kind of like survive for so long? No pun intended. It's because they give you creative tools, guys. Actual creative tools. You can create your own shit. Right? You can build your own house. You can build your own castle. Right? Survival games give you, Minecraft included, this level of control over your environment, which just ups everything. It ups the intensity, it ups how hardcore the games can get. Many of these games are very hardcore. People will joke about Minecraft, and I used to joke about it too, but then my friend showed me like fucking PK Minecraft servers. And I was blown away. I was like, these guys are playing the same kind of game I was playing when I was coming up playing Ultima and Darkfall. It's a different game, but like what I'm saying is like they're hardcore players. Like I can't just dismiss them because they're playing a pixel game, you know? And plus, like, Minecraft, for those who've played it, actually has a physics engine, so it's not an easy game to play, like, at a high level. So I think that, like, people oftentimes will look at survival games and kind of be, like, very, like, dismissive of them. And I get it. I hate on them a lot, too, because they lack long-term progression systems, which I just don't like personally. But I think that they, like, oftentimes will forget the fact that these games are basically PvP sandbox games that have, like, very little in the way of, like, PvE content. And that's partly a problem in some of them, but look at games like Ark and Palworld. They're able to do very, 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 very well by adding a lot of PvE content. And so I think that, like, if MMOs keep trying to just fight with these games on the pretense of being just the sandbox game, I kind of think they're gonna lose most of the time. You see what I'm saying? Like, I kind of feel like they'll lose that battle because survival games are just able to do more with less. And I think we've seen that. The survival genre, I think, is no mistake. I think it came to prominence because they realized that there's this aspect of MMOs and online gaming they can kind of just like jack, right? Yoink. Steal the early game experience. Yoink. Steal the whole sandbox stuff. Yoink. Now, what some survival games have tried to do, like the Conan Exiles, they've tried to introduce like story content with that, but it's oftentimes not been done very well. So I think that, like, if you're gonna ask me how can MMOs like still remain like the forefront of like the popular online RPG, I don't think it's trying to compete with games like Minecraft. So that's why it's like New World changing that idea. Not inherently bad if you're not gonna go all in on it, right? If you go all in on it, like Landmark and other games like that, there's still a chance you could be competitive against a game like Minecraft because you have larger scale. But I think trying to fight them on physics and creation, just not gonna work. So I think right now, like, MMOs need both. They need the theme park content to draw the players in, but they need the world with the tools there so you can have fun once you're there. And I think that it's funny because back in the day, like, for people who are watching this who've been around for a while, we would have never argued shit like that. Like, back in the day, we were always trying to separate the two games. We felt like we should not combine them. But things are changing, and I actually think that more compelling worlds are going to have both, always. And hey, Raph said that too, so take his word for it, not mine. The other thing I think that's a bit of my perspective that goes along with this, that's a bit early going because most people probably aren't talking about this right now, is that I think to actually make a compelling PvP world, you have to make a compelling PvE world. And it's a problem that many games will often lack one and only have the other. And, you know, the games that are able to have both have continued to have success, like EVE Online, right? Or you look over here and you're like, well, Ultima Online, Dark Age of Camelot, Asheron's Call. These games, and even not like besides as many times as Darkfall has failed, it keeps coming back. These games have had some success by playing with the whole throne war simulator, but what they oftentimes lack is what makes RuneScape so special. They lack the PvE experiences. They lack the whole other part of the world. And so when I was young, I used to be like most people probably. We need to separate these two hemispheres, if you will, like this. Here's the problem with doing that. When you separate these hemispheres, they become weaker, right? They don't have the strength of the structure anymore. So what ends up happening is the PvE worlds, when you separate them so much from PvP threats, now you no longer have danger in a lot of your worlds. And that's just, it's not always 100% a fact, but like 95, 98% of the time, it's true. And for the reverse effect, when you remove the PvP portion, what you end up lacking is the connectivity to the actual world, because you have a conflict and you have a reason to work together. So when you have these two things working in unison, you have experiences like Dark Age of Camelot, where in order to take the big in-game dungeon, Darkness Falls, you had to PvP. But in the dungeon, you were PvEing. So you had these two interesting elements that were combined together. And so you have crafters, PvEers that can assist factions and guilds and so on and so forth in battle without having to actually fight. Another key element as well. So that's a big thing that I'm kind of on right now, is that I think that like that's lacking a lot. These two types of worlds are, look at Guild Wars 2 as a perfect example. If you guys want to know like what game right now would you take and turn it into like more of a world experience, it would be Guild Wars. And I'll tell you how I would do it. Fuck the Eternal, whatever the fuck. Unless we're gonna add more mechanics and fully flesh this out more, fuck that shit, it's just arena. Add instances that are PvP enabled throughout the entirety of the world, and add the faction systems on top of that. So just make it to where that becomes the game, even if it is XP based. The points that I'm trying to make is like, yeah, I mean, the Eternal Battleground, exactly. With a game like Guild Wars, you don't actually have to do that much to actually add conflict and fun PvP into the world. The problem is, of course, it would take you tweaking whatever the actual game is. And there's nothing wrong with having a separate instance for that, because Guild Wars has already allowed for that. Guild Wars 1, as far as I understand, guys, created that system. The whole like channel instance system that everybody uses basically these days, even if they don't let you choose the actual dropdown. They got it from Guild Wars 1. And Guild Wars 1 arguably got it from Phantasy Star. So like, that still being a thing, I'm not against having instances, but start approaching it more like RuneScape does. What's the point of having all these instances that are just gonna be fucking sitting around doing nothing? And having the capability but not even using it. I just don't get it. Guild Wars leaves so much on the table there. They could even add a hardcore PvE instance. Like, so that's the game that I would choose, and just try to add a, I don't even think that requires tweaking that many things. Yeah, and that's the problem, Mr. Zero Sins, is oftentimes, I mean, obviously you and I have played the game a lot, but the problem is that once you learn how Guild Wars' systems work, the magic is lost a little bit, and I think that has to be admitted. The magic is lost a little bit, and it's because you kind of feel like, you know what? I know if I leave this dude here, he's just gonna die, there's no big deal. Now, if you added some kind of like factional like point element to that, right? Or helping the war effort is something that you can actually do, well, then you're gonna have people that actually want to get involved in the war and won't just leave them there. Guild Wars 2 finally added world versus world and PvP balance to guild halls. Wow. Guild halls is a great example. Don't get me started. Like on GVG. Oh my god. I could fix the fucking PvP scene in Guild Wars 2 instance PvP right now. Commit to fucking guild halls, GVG, and add spectator to your, literally just copy fucking Guild Wars 2 or Guild Wars 1. You know what else I would copy? Random arenas, bro. You're already doing random arenas because nobody wants to play the fucking queue system, to be fair. But I'm saying, do the same system. Unlock team queue, give you more rewards. Then go to the next level, add a Hall of Heroes. Like, I mean, it's just like, oh, guys. Guild Wars leaves so much on the table, man.
Anyway, I ended up ranting about Guild Wars. It's because it's just a game that I feel like has and had so much potential PvP wise, and they just squandered it because I think they just didn't really know what to do, and they had their hand in too many cookie jars. They were like, oh, let's try this, let's try this, let's try fucking. Does anyone understand the absurdity that was Guild Wars 2 at launch? This game, arguably, one of the most oversold games I've ever been a part of. Like, I know people say, yeah, but SWTOR, yeah. I mean, but they kind of told us what they were going to make. Guild Wars 2 was, like, insanely overhyped. And why? It's because this was their fucking sales pitch, guys. We're going to make a Living World season PvE open fucking questing game that happens dynamically. And we're going to make a super competitive, like, really hard to play combat system. And we're going to commit to esports for some reason early on without committing, really. And we're going to do instance content as well, like raids and strikes and story. And it's like, what the? They actually tried to do all of it. Like, one of the few games in a long time that did. They tried to do everything, guys. And I think that's why they faltered so much. They didn't know what they wanted to do. The living season stuff, but then they had tons of people missing it, and the content schedule was a problem, and they didn't figure out that they could just replay the season until much later on. So they kind of, I mean, I hate being so harsh about the living season, but I have Guild Wars fans in chat. They might be harsher than I am, but I'll tell you what most Guild Wars fans view the living seasons as: a failure. They don't see it as a good thing. Most of the fan base that I've talked to, that still plays especially, views that as like, that was for the other players, not the Guild Wars players. Like, I'm just being honest, like, a lot of players fucking hated it. Like, I don't think it's because it was bad. I think, to Dessa's point, it's just because it wasn't fully figured out. They wanted to have a Asheron's Call, like, evolving story. The problem is that the content load that they had to keep up with was fucking insane. Right? What they had to keep up with was insane. And simultaneously coming out with new zones and all this other stuff. It was just like, they created a very difficult problem for themselves. Yeah, I like the new model, and I also think that doing the living season on replaying schedules could have worked too. And for people wondering, I mean, it's Guild Wars 1 literally had game-ending prophecy moments in the first expansion, like the first game. How did they do it though? They did time skips, bro. Come on, every anime knows that shit. Guild Wars 1 just did time skips. You guys ever heard about this? In prophecies, there's a time skip. Boom, time skip happens. It confused me too when I was first playing the game. But then suddenly I'm like, what the fuck? Why is Rurik like old and shit? I figured out why. So that's what Guild Wars 1 did. They separated the states of the world. I think that that was the best option, personally. That's me. I think they should have done that. I think for players, you could have chose, hey, I want to be a part of the story, the living story. But let's say if you had missed the living story, they could have ported you to another instance, or maybe you were awaiting it to happen on the next cycle. You see what I'm saying? In a pre-skip world. Would there have been some slight complications? Yeah. But they already did that before. They've already done that stuff before. So I think that they had the solution to their problem, but they did not understand, or it took them way too long to actually fix it. I think the problem with that, Rept, because I agree with you slightly about just do what Final Fantasy XIV is doing, is that I'm just gonna be the one to admit it, because most people don't like to be honest about it. The story in Guild Wars is just Guild Wars 2 specifically is not very good. You might argue, why do you say Guild Wars 2? I personally like the story in the first game more because it feels more cooperative. They tried to go bigger scale for the subsequent game, and I think that you lose a lot of what makes that special, especially because there's no voice acting for most of the game. The story is delivered in a very boring way that hasn't been changed. Again, back then, the kind of game they were making had so much things in it. I feel like it worked for the time, but I feel like you play it today, like especially like expansion stuff, and the story stuff is not very good. A lot of people I know that play it don't like it and just talk about just skipping it. So I think that that's also another problem is it's hard to get bought into the story of Guild Wars 2. I think that Guild Wars 1 was way more hand-holdy, which helped with that, if that makes sense. You kind of had to get stuck into the story because you had to beat the expansions. Guild Wars 2 feels more kind of like disconnected from that stuff, which feels kind of cool in the sense that like it's a buy-to-play game and da-da-da. But I don't know, I feel like as much as I love Guild Wars 2, I really do feel like it was a design mishap. Like, they made some mistakes design-wise, you know what I'm saying? Like, I agree with that, Rept. That's fair. I do agree with that statement. That I think Guild Wars 2 offers a more fun gameplay experience. Like, even early on, like, I like a lot of the early questing and open questing stuff. Problem is it's just not challenging. And this is a complaint that I actually remember telling Mr. Zero Zens a long time ago. Guild Wars 2's balancing is so fucking frustrating. Yeah, exactly. Nothing but mistakes. And these are easy things they could fix. And like, you might be saying, yeah, but is this really so easy, nerd? I'll tell you, dude, I got quoted on Guild Wars 2 subreddit for this without even knowing people were gonna fucking quote me. That's how easy this fucking solution was, and everyone agreed. Which is, you guys ready? All Guild Wars has to fucking do to fix their leveling system is just scale back the levels by like, literally. Play Guild Wars 2 right now for anyone who has a character that's not max level, and find monsters that are like 3 to 4 levels higher than you. It feels like you're playing early closed beta fucking Terra, dude. Like, seriously, like, you have to like be on your P's and Q's, like boom, 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 hit all your fucking abilities like perfectly. It is the hardest, most challenging, awesome game experience that I had when I was playing Guild Wars 2. It's just go to zones when you're under-leveled. And then I go back to the rest of the game, and I'm like, who's balancing this? And I know what their idea is because I was there when they came up with this dumbass idea. Remember, I've told this story a million times. When they were testing the combat in beta, many players complained about the early game experiences and the dungeons. They felt like they were just too difficult. And so, what ArenaNet did last second, SWTOR did the same thing, by the way, and ruined their game as well, but worse, because everyone beat their game in like a couple of months. But in Guild Wars 2's case, they made the game easy. They made the leveling experience easy. And I've heard a lot of people argue about this before, and it's always based on the same logic. You're trying to get more people to beat your leveling experience, so then therefore, you want them to be able to get through it. Here's the problem. Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 1 are very complex games. They are not easy games, okay? They're very difficult games. I used to play on the ladder on Guild Wars 1. It was difficult. I was a pro player on a top team in Guild Wars 2. Believe me when I say, you could say I'm biased, but these are some of the most difficult games I played. So you have that barrier already. It's a difficult game. Then in Guild Wars 2, they went and made it super mechanically difficult as well. So you have the StarCraft approach going on, where now nobody can actually even like do the game as it's supposed to be played. So ArenaNet got scared because they kept getting a lot of feedback, and it's hard for me to find this information, but back in the day, just trust me when I say that, like, there were multiple outlets coming out. Polygon, Rock Paper Shotgun, IGN, you name it, nearly every major outlet was saying, yo, this game's too fucking hard. Same thing happened in SWTOR, by the way. The same thing, actually. The problem is in SWTOR, it's easier to trivialize the gameplay in a way that doesn't actually ruin the story experience completely. Now, I'm not going to say it like it doesn't ruin it somewhat, but ruin it completely. In Guild Wars 2, if you make it too easy, most people check out. Because it just becomes doing the next thing that you're supposed to do in that game. And that's a shitty part about it, is like, in Guild Wars 1, it was actually pretty challenging to play the game. Most of the time we were playing with like bots, so when we got like real players, it was like, ah, yes. But going through the story experiences required you knowing the encounters. So there were some predictive elements to it, right? If you knew what you were doing. But you still had to learn what you're supposed to do and how to win each engagement. And so that it was still very challenging and very cooperative. Because Guild Wars 2 and SWTOR also trivialized their leveling and early game experiences, you never learned how to play the game. That's the problem. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that like they just didn't understand that, to be fair. I'm not trying to like excuse them necessarily, but like think about how difficult Guild Wars 2 ended up being as a game. I don't think the developers had any idea it was ever going to get that difficult. I'm just being honest with you guys. When I was testing the game in closed beta, we would play against some of the devs who had been testing the game since inception, and we would like fucking Flame Horizon them. It wasn't even close. We would annihilate them. I bet you if it was Guild Wars 1, they would have been clapping our cheeks, because many of the devs were really good at that game. I know. But in Guild Wars 2, we smacked the devs easy. In betas. We were already smacking them in beta, which is unheard of usually. Usually in beta, like, devs will get like a bit of the upper hand. We were smacking them already. So like, I think the cracks showed early on that like, they just did not know. You know what I'm saying? Like, to how difficult that game was gonna get. But I kind of do want to like give them a gut punch to be like, you guys had something so great and you chickened out at the last second, which doomed your endgame. And now for people that have played the endgame, you'll back me up on this, that like, people might say, yeah, but didn't they get more people to play? Yeah, but it's a buy-to-play game, so how much of that was needed? Meaning they weren't getting monetized by subscription, meaning that you keeping them at lower levels didn't really help you much. And you giving them a easier leveling experience also didn't make you more money. Not really. So I think you have this player base who sucks, gets to the in-game content, realizes the game's fucking hard, and gets a gut punch. Boom! They're just like, I can't play this game. Which is why you hear absurd statistics, like the top players in Guild Wars 2 PvE do more than 80% of the damage of everybody else combined. Meaning that like the top 20% players are better than 80% of the players DPS wise. Not just like individually, meaning overall DPS. It feels like a different game because it basically is. When you go from hitting this level to suddenly you're PvPing or you're doing fucking, strikes or something like that. Requiring map completion for legendaries, yeah. Yeah. I'm never gonna defend the end game, honestly. I'm never gonna defend the end game. I know where you're going, Rept, and that's actually the funny joke I always make with my friends is that like when you first play Guild Wars 2, you think you're playing an action game, and then you get a bunch of abilities and start specking, and you realize you're playing a keyboard game. You're playing a fucking keyboard game. In reality, you're playing a rotation game that's happening in fucking fractions of seconds, where people are predicting what boons you're gonna have, what conditions you're gonna have, fucking countering that shit, knowing when you're gonna book so they could break your stability. Like the anytime I ever talk about the amount of actions that happen in a single PvE engagement or PvP engagement at the highest level in Guild Wars 2, it feels like I'm fucking like breaking down a whole game of chess. You know what I'm saying? Like in one engagement. It's just it's pretty overwhelming. So that's the problem with Guild Wars 2 is that you get bought into the action. And I've seen all my friends go through this experience where they're like, man, this is fucking kick ass. Like, I'm good at this game and shit. And then they start like getting to the later content and they're like, dude, I can't hit anybody. And I'm like, I know. I know, bro. I miss Guild Wars 1, but it feels so dated and I struggle to go back to it. Yeah, no, Guild Wars 1 is like rock, paper, scissors. You know, if I'm gonna be like, that's the meanest thing I could say. But it's like rock, paper, scissors. Which means that like when you know what you're doing, you're just waiting to counter. Like for example, I played an interrupt ranger, which was like the fastest class in the game, which was not fast at all. Because it would be like this. I would just sit there and I'd be like, okay. Interrupt. Alright, I got my interrupt. Maybe I do my rotation now. Boom, 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 boom. Hit some abilities. Okay. Repeat the process. I'm just sitting there and I'm just literally waiting to press interrupt. That was my entire job in Guild Wars 1. I'm like, okay, ready. Alright, boom, interrupt. And then and they called it spiking. And Guild Wars 1 is so debilitatingly like frustrating if you don't use your brain correctly. And I'm not just trying to be arrogant, like I mean literally like you'll be playing it and like Zero Sins is saying you'll lose your first engagement. But you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, can I actually even have a chance to win this? Because when you're playing GVG, how it works is each subsequent loss, you lose morale. So unless your flag runner can do a flag cap or boost your morale, each subsequent fight you fight, you'll lose. So what good guild versus guild players would do is based on the first engagement, they would make a call in comms. Hey, let's regroup it. Da 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 da. Oh damn, no, it's Ellie Spike, fucking blah blah blah, like double warrior. And so we would just scoop. Like that would happen all the time, guys. Like we would just scoop against the top team, and they would scoop against us because they saw our build. So Guild Wars 1 was like very rock paper, like to the point to where anyone who's played it will back me up on this. If you played Team Q in that game, Team Arena, Team Arena, like for some reason was so fucking trolly, and it was because what people would do is they would run around and click on you and see what your build was, and they would make like reads like, can we fight against them or not? And so what I used to do in fucking Team Arena, and everyone's gonna laugh because you're gonna be like, you would be this guy. I would play Touch Ranger. So Touch Ranger, basically you have Vamp, you play with Necro, and you run really fast, and you block everything. So the entire point of the build is, if someone's stupid, you can kill them. But it's pretty hard to actually kill people with the build if they're smart. So what you do is just annoy them. Just keep running around. And the funny thing is it's a PvE build. I saw a rep saying that on PvE trash, so this is out of my wheelhouse. Yeah, this is actually a PvE build. That's the hilarious part about Guild Wars 1 is that you can take these like absurd, silly PvE builds and actually use them in PvP. But again, it just depends on like like if you're playing Hollow Heroes and you're playing with a troll fucking Touch Ranger, you're probably gonna clap. Because it's AV8 and there's more spiking. Same thing with GVG. But if you're playing Team Arena, you can get away with playing like stupid Touch Ranger. One of the common builds that was very famous was called Bunny Thumper. Bunny Thumper was a ranger mixed with a warrior who had a hammer, and he attacked very fast because he had high agility, so he would just keep stunning you. And this is stuff that's missing in Guild Wars 2 that was just very fun. Because Guild Wars 2 got rid of a lot of like the... Guild Wars 2 has what you would call a hybrid class system. Meaning that you can hybrid classes. Like, for example, mixing this with this. But it's not like dual classing. Guild Wars 1 has dual classing. Which means you can legitimately have a Necro playing with a Ranger. And it operates like that. Yeah, WoW Arena is, you know, people know all the builds because people play all the same shit. And the game's, you know, balanced around basically like the same abilities. In Guild Wars, it's a lot harder. It takes way more knowledge. So what I'm trying to say is that like, in Guild Wars, if you didn't know what a build was, you just got your ass beat and learned what the build was. So when you were on ladder, for example, let's say you were playing with a standard warrior spike, but you encountered like an all Ellie spike. Ellie spikes were so cancerous because they kind of sow chaos and they take advantage of you. And so if you played against a build like that, you would get rocked. And then you're sitting there in lobby thinking, and this was very common, we would go back to lobby in guild halls and just be like, fuck, what was their build? We'd go back, copy the builds, because that's how the game worked, and try to look up what their build was. Well, we saw the replay and he was using X Elite. So we would look up the Elite and be like, okay, so what was their spike? And there was a website called Team Builder, and you could look up different spikes, and they would actually tell you like what was good against this and kind of what was weak against this. So that's what we would do on ladder. We would look up the abilities, find the builds, and then do that. And then the other way you would learn how to play, and this was very common, this is very funny too, is we were so elitist in Guild Wars 1. I'm not kidding, guys, that when you were playing PvE, or rather PvP, because in PvE, most people kind of let you do your own thing. They would just ask what your elite was. In PvP, if someone joined your lobby and they were lower rank, you would give them a build. Oh, man. That's how elitist it was, dude. But here's the thing. I'm laughing, and you might be saying, yeah, you just got used to the trauma. In my defense, when I was playing Guild Wars 1, guys, I was like 10 years old. 10 or 11 years old. I didn't have the biggest brain yet to know all the counters and shit. So it actually was good that people were kind of arrogant like that and would give you a build because I learned how to play using good builds. So I actually got addicted to doing that. Meaning that I would join lobbies and join people's teams, and I would ask them, hey, what do you want me to play? And they would just tell me, hey, here's a build. And I would just click load and boom, load that up. And mind you, sometimes I wouldn't have the abilities, but like That's how I learned how to play, was by like taking people's builds that they would give me and being like, okay, because remember back then, like we didn't have all the YouTube guides and shit in the same way where you could just learn how to play. Like, so it was very much like I was taking people's builds in game that they would assign to me, and I would play with them, and I'd be like, oh, I like this build. It has ignore pain. It has this. It has that. But without me doing that, and without them having that kind of like share system, I don't think I would have learned how to play the game. So, and to be clear, people might be saying, wow, it sounds so arrogant. To be fair, when you get to like anything higher than Team Arena, so random arenas, Team Arena, well, technically, against the bots, random arena, Team Arena, and it starts to go to things like Hall of Heroes. When you're in a Hall of Heroes team, you're basically in a pre-made, which means that you're playing a build. So maybe there's some kind of like variance there, including with your non-elite skills and stuff like that. But do you see what I'm saying? It's because the whole point is that you're playing a specific spike. If you're playing an Ellie spike and you're not playing an Ellie, you're gonna get booted. You see what I'm saying? So the point is that you played whatever your team comp needed. So that also bred more people being willing to play other types of things. It sounds like Math Nerd's version of seeing dirty tech in a fighting game. I mean, yeah, basically in a sense. You get beat up on and then you're just like, okay, this is what's going on. So that's why I'm very fortunate that I started with Guild Wars as one of my first games online, because it taught me to have that brain of like, how do you counter this? How do you counter that? How do you counter this? Neo took me back. Neo, so he's in Twitch chat. He said, I remember the Ventrilo days, 3, 2, 1 spy. There's actually a famous Ventrilo harassment, where the dude, most people didn't know what it was, but I was such a nerd that I instantly recognized it. That he joined a chat, and he kept saying, all right, spike on 3, 2, 1, spike. And the dude recorded his voice and he kept playing it over and over again. Which for anyone who's ever been a part of a spike, you would know that that would just drive someone insane. The strike leader was the one that picked the target and would call the spike, and he would spike his target. This famous Ventrilo harassment is them repeating the 3, 2, 1 spike. And I remember every time I would hear that, I would just die laughing, because I remembered being a part of those spikes, and since I was an interrupt ranger, I was like the guy that had to lead the spike off. And oh my god, I would get so nervous when I would play, because I was a little kid and I'm like in comms with grown-ass dudes, and I'm like, okay, they're like 3, 2, 1 spike. I'm like, they're like, no one interrupted, and I'm like, because it would be me that was supposed to interrupt. I was like, one time our spiking was so bad, the fucking leader just took us to the dummies and started practicing. He's like, all right, 3, 2, 1 spike. We're sitting there in the dummies, just fucking hitting the dummies and shit. Oh, man. Yeah, man. That anxiety brought me back, because like I said, I was literally a fucking toddler playing like GVG. That shit was so nerve-wracking, man. Like, we would get smacked in lobby. But you might ask, before I go, I wanted to tell the rest of this story. When I went from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2, how much of the skill kind of overlapped? The build generation, the ability to understand combos, and what the beat is, which is a concept in card games, which means like who's beating whoever's ass, basically. learning those things from Guild Wars 1 made Guild Wars 2 very easy for me. That being said, I already was a very good mechanical player, so I kind of like was a cheat code. I mean, I think it's why I was pro so quickly on, was because I had all the brain knowledge from Guild Wars 1, and I was already like theory crafting my shit before the game came out. Which I ended up being right about, by the way. And then whenever the game actually came out, I was a StarCraft player of many years, so I was good, and a Halo player, so I was good mechanically. So I was able to just, man, I felt bad for some of the comp scene early on was really large, but it wasn't very good. I'm talking Guild Wars 2. Because you had a bunch of players like me, but you also had like ex-gladiators from WoW and a bunch of other pro players from other MMOs. And we all hit the ground running. And a lot of like the pre-made teams that were just like learning the game, because there was no rank system, they would just get destroyed by us. So unfortunately, Guild Wars 2, we hemorrhaged a lot of players just by destroying them. And, you know, it wasn't just me, it was other veterans too. Because we understood how to think. You see what I'm saying? Because most people were just like playing it like an action game. My friends and I already came up with builds. Like, I was playing Epidemic before it got nerfed in World vs. World. And SPVP. And it's because I played with the Pyro mage spec, which has a dot that you can spread as well. But I also played Guild Wars 1, and I knew that spreading as a condition is a very effortless way to just do damage. So that kind of just helped me out. Now, another way that I was able to exploit the meta was using confusion. And that's because confusion in the first game was super powerful. So I didn't have to do that much thinking. I just thought, I mean, confusion was OP in the first game. It's probably OP in the second game. It was. They nerfed the Mesmer a bunch of times. But yeah, so like, that's why I still have a lot of love for Guild Wars 2, is that if you are a big brain, you can still excel playing that game. Problem is, you just can't play certain classes or certain specs. Like the chances of you playing a warrior, if you're not mechanically good, and they don't even have a lot of inputs, it's more that you just have to do them at the right times. You gonna die. Yeah, they pushed esports twice. Unfortunately, the problem is that they promised it at launch, then didn't do anything for like basically a year and a half. When they started doing stuff, most of the scene had died already. So they like kind of like pieced together a scene again. It didn't do so well, but they were just like, okay, well maybe it's just because like we didn't have any of the features we needed. So then they did it again, the next expansion. But again, like, trying to launch an esports scene is already difficult, but doing it out of the gate without ever having a competitive scene first, like, created was just stupid. Like, how many more times do I need to tell developers and publishers that, like, forcing an esports scene does not work? And you might wonder, well, why do they even think they could do esports? Because Guild Wars 1 had a successful scene. Guild Wars 1 actually had a pretty good comp scene. Arguably one of the best in any MMO ever. Or more per G, to be specific. The problem is how did Guild Wars 1 build its scene? Grassroots. The game wasn't made for that originally. They had to create an expansion to develop the PvP aspects of the game, called factions. Before that, it was a PvE cooperative game. So Guild Wars 1, their formula was very different than the second game. The second game tried to do everything at the same time. The first game actually took its time, and it slowly introduced these things. And it also introduced it as part of the narrative of the game. So PvP wasn't just being the competitive, you know, it was also like doing factions and doing Jade Quarry and playing with your friends and so on and so forth. So yeah, like that was kind of like the problem there. And then of course, like this entire time, by the way, most of us in the competitive scene were telling them this. The problem is that a lot of the pros that I was playing alongside were just desperate kids that were just trying to make a living. So they weren't as like, they weren't thinking as far into the future as I was, which is why I quit the scene fairly early on, because I could tell that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And it wasn't going anywhere because the player base was shrinking by the day, by the hour. They didn't have an actual spectator system. They didn't have an actual lobby system yet. And they didn't actually have a rank system. So needless to say, you can't have a real comp scene working with all of that working against you. You just can't. Look at Stormgate right now, guys. Stormgate's not even fucking out. It's playable in beta. Well, it just had an open beta, but it was playable for in closed beta, you know, if you got invited or whatever. That game is already super competitive. Already has laddering, already has customs. And so whenever people argue that you can't make a competitive game right at the start, you can. You just have to do a good job of it. And yeah, it ain't easy to do, which is why MMOs probably shouldn't do that at the start. They should focus on PvP, but let the scene build, you know? And then they wasted years making bad LOL. Yep, and that was the problem is that once they started committing to their PvP, I still to this day would love to talk to the devs there. Most of them are gone that worked in PvP. But I'd love to just talk to them and say, why were you guys so dumb enough to think that cap points would like work? I repeat, why were you guys dumb enough to think that capture point maps work? They don't work. And they tried different amalgamations. Those didn't work either. That was one of the most frustrating parts for me, is that I had to listen to developers basically argue for a model that never existed before and still hasn't existed today as a method of being good competitively. No, guys, trust me. The cap points will work. King of the Hill will work because it has numbers. Like literally, like what was the onus for wanting to make that the main mode? Nobody was doing it. StarCraft didn't do it. League wasn't doing it. Not even Overwatch was doing it, which is kind of funny. Like, I don't think it's a competitive mode. I genuinely think Conquest will never, ever, 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 ever be featured in any serious PvP competitive mode. I genuinely don't think it'll ever work. And here's my example. Rated BGs are basically Conquest in WoW, and almost nobody plays them. They're not played very much. Arena is played more. And Arena is not Conquest. Arena is just about beating your team. So like, for me, like their over-reliance and like obsession with doing Conquest just made literally no sense. Like, it's not a good mode competition. And I'll tell you guys why. I'll do some shot casting. And we'll talk about like what's exciting. Okay, so here's some WoW shot casting. Oh my god, and he trinkets it. No, he trinkets it. He gets cyclone instantly. Yeah, off the cyclone, he gets interrupted instantly. Oh no, his heal's interrupted. He's going down. He's going. Oh, he's down. Oh wow, it's so exciting. It's like, okay, that's like arena combat, like shoutcasting. You ready for shoutcasting in Guild Wars 2? And by the way, I used to listen to it all the time, so I'm not even just like trolling, I'm being honest. Okay, so they're gonna have to make a play at point 1 here. And they are unable to knock him off the point. Looks like they're bringing somebody else. And they are unable to knock him off the point. He's able to just stay on the point and just soak those points in. What do you do if you can't take the point? Think about that. Just think about it like for 5 seconds, anyone who's ever played a sport and anyone who's ever done anything competitive. What the fuck are you supposed to talk about competitively if they can't take the point? And what do you do if they can't take the point? You don't do anything, honestly. You just sit there and watch them accrue a point lead that just continues to go higher and higher and higher, and then they win on points. You do not have to kill your opponent to win in Conquest. I repeat, you do not have to kill your opponent to win in Conquest. Which means that you could have a game, this is very easy to understand logically, where nobody actually dies. That is not exciting in any sport ever. Like, no dynamism, no ability to lose or win is not exciting. Like, it's boring as fuck to watch. And it's why nobody ever watched the competitive scene. And you might be saying, yeah, but what if they just like didn't focus so much on capping the points? Who do you think tried to argue that to everybody? I did. But what's the problem? The point is to cap the point and hold it. So my argument back in the pro scene was, what if we just say fuck the whole cap point system, play in conquest mode, but let's just play with dynamism. Let's play with some fucking spike builds. Let's keep things exciting. And everyone, literally the top team that ended up winning the first tournament in the game told me, they told me no, fuck no. Because they were using a 3 bunker build. And in that 3 bunker build, they only had 1 or 2 people that could actually get kills. So essentially how they would beat you is just get on the point quickly and occupy the point so you couldn't get them off. And they loved celebrating their victories, including when they won their tournament, using that strategy. But here's the thing. Nobody wants to watch that. Nobody will watch that. I think Rep said something about what does League work. The thing with League is that there's a lot of moving parts, right? League is not just running around and fighting. You have to CS, right? So laning phase is a distinctive, different part of the game. In Conquest mode, early game is almost no different than mid or late game. You see what I'm saying? It's almost no difference. Because in the beginning of the game, unless you're playing on like faux fire or things that have bosses, there's no urgency to go anywhere on the map except to go to the points. So basically the flow of the game plays the same, whether or not you're up or down. Mind you, you have to try to make different moves strategically when you're down and up. But the point that I'm making is the flow of the game will feel the same. In Guild Wars 1, GVG did not function that way. Why? Because in GVG, there are multiple things to do on the map. You have to run a flag, and there's an objective on every map. So you have a flag carrier, and you have usually a splitter. These guys are almost like running around, roaming the entire time. That was my job. I loved it. You were always roaming around trying to get kills, slow people down, and kind of like do the objective. The other team would basically deathball each other, but they can't full commit because they can't die because they'll lose morale. So it was just like this like dance where they're fighting and they're kind of retreating and fighting and kind of retreating. And so these were different phases. And League has that same concept where it's like the beginning phase is separate right? There's like a roaming phase, there's a leveling phase, and then when you start to actually have the team fighting happen, right? Like you said, actually, that's a good point. That's a great point, Rept. See, we already figured out part of the problem there is that capping a tower, if you will, or destroying a tower actually gives you fog of war and gives you progress by giving you money and resources. So there's a point of progression just by being. So what I call players that do that, I call them 8 players, because I'm currently playing lean. The players that just bang their head against the towers until they kill them, which happens all the way in plat, by the way, because I'm gold 1 at the moment. Those players, they're creating progress still. They're still progressing the game. If they were playing a 5 versus 5 game where they had to cap the points, they're not progressing the game unless they're trying to take the points. So it just goes back to, it's just, is King of the Hill a fun game type? Yeah, I think so. I like it in Halo. Should it be your sole, like, competitive mode? Not unless you're going to heavily enforce your ability to bunker on points, which they just never did. Because think about it, how could they enforce it when you need it in World versus World? They got rid of the Holy Trinity, so you need supports to still do something. They were kind of in a bad spot. They couldn't really fix the bunkers. Not easily. They could fix them, but they couldn't fix them easily. But yeah, so that was the problem with their comp scene, is it's built on something that's just inherently not that exciting. Now, that being said, I think what people will often take the wrong way is they say, yeah, you're trying to say Guild Wars 2's PvP is not exciting. It's like, guys, I've had the most intense matches I've ever had in Guild Wars 2. Like the most competitive matches, the most hard-fought matches. And that game was competitive, dude. But the comp scene died in like 1 year. And it also had a really bad like PvP objective system that didn't lend itself to just being exciting to watch. So they could have been a game that was niche, and yet people watched it because of the skill level. But because they made it a boring spectator sport, they killed that too. Which again, it sucks because Mr. Zero Sins, everyone here can back me up that like, if everyone just like elected to play fucking like, you know, non-bunkery boring builds, the game would be fun as fuck to watch. Because I agree with Axia that in the sense that like bunker builds should still exist because they're fun in themselves and they are a way to play the game. The problem is that if everyone makes a like concerted team effort to just bunker and not fight, then suddenly you have this idea where it's like you can't actually take the points, so no swings of motion, and oh no, Expeke, he's going for the back door, oh, he wins. That doesn't exist in Conquest. This is Conquest, is it? All right, and he's got a 200 point lead. It's like the game's over, bro. There's no excitement to that. But yeah, when they started doing the 2 versus 2 modes and the 3 versus 3 modes, I actually think that that was the most fun competitively I had playing the game. Which is sad because it just shows that like they didn't balance it well enough for 5 versus 5, or even more than that. Like, probably, I think part of the problem being that PvP and PvE weren't split enough. Right, Guild Wars 1 did a better job of splitting them. But, I guess what I'm trying to say is like their small scale PvP works really, 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 really well in Guild Wars 2. The dueling, the 2 versus 2, the 3 versus 3. It's when you start to add that 4th and 5th person that suddenly their entire job can just be like to never die. And suddenly it becomes like, a tank is a real part of a game, but tanks aren't always just not trying to die. Tank, I've played tank in many MMOs, and it's a dynamic position in PvP. You're not just not dying, you're peeling, you're starting off spikes, you're protecting your teammates. Yeah, and that's the thing is, like Axia and many other people have been saying in chat, some of the most fun had in Conquest is when you split, and I was a splitter, so I know what that's like. When I can win a 1 versus 2, or when I'm fighting 1 versus 3, but I manage to not die, and I can just like somehow like fucking big brain my way through the fight. Like that is exciting. There is excitement to that. The problem is that it then becomes a matter of like spectating, where it's like, if I'm able to have engagements split like that and keep them dynamic, it'll be fun. But if it starts to drag and nothing ever happens, then it becomes boring. So Stronghold could have maybe done it without NPC mobs and with half the objectives. So people hate on the Stronghold. I kind of like them, but the problem with them is that the maps are just fucking massive. And I think that that's a problem. But anyway, we've had some good discussion. I actually have to go to the restroom, which means I'm going to end my stream. But anyway, it was good talking to everybody about Guild Wars 2. Now I want to play Guild Wars 2. But anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good rest of your week. Peace. Where's my...